She didn't just say no, she shut doors before they were even knocked on.
Will you have dinner with me?
Invitations went unanswered, kind gestures were met with polite distance, and every hopeful glance in her direction dissolved against a wall she had spent years building. People in her town whispered about her, about how she had become unreachable, untouchable, almost invisible by choice. And yet, no one knew the truth. No one knew that behind her quiet rejection of every man was a story of heartbreak so deep it had rewritten the way she saw the world. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of healing, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to The Kindness Chronicles. Stories like this deserve to be felt, remembered, and passed on. Her name was Alara, and once, long ago, she had believed in love the way children believe in magic, fully, fearlessly, without question. She had been the kind of woman who smiled easily, who lingered in conversations, who saw beauty in ordinary things like the way sunlight touched a dusty window or how strangers could become friends over shared laughter. But life, in its cruel unpredictability, had taken that version of her and slowly unraveled it. It had started with trust, misplaced, fragile trust. The man she had once loved had not just left her, he had dismantled her sense of worth piece by piece. Promises had turned into excuses, affection into indifference, and eventually, love into silence. By the time he walked away, Alara wasn't just heartbroken, she was hollowed out. She didn't cry loudly or dramatically. Instead, she withdrew, quietly folding herself into a smaller, safer version of who she used to be. Years passed, but the echoes of that betrayal stayed with her. Every time someone tried to get close, her mind replayed old wounds like a warning siren. She convinced herself that solitude was strength, that distance was protection. People admired her independence, her calm demeanor, but they didn't see the invisible armor she wore every day. Her world became predictable, almost mechanical. She worked at a small bookstore tucked away on a quiet street, where the smell of paper and ink wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. Books didn't betray you. Stories didn't abandon you halfway through. They had endings, even if those endings were sad. There was something reassuring in that certainty. Customers came and went, some lingering to talk, others simply browsing. A few men tried to strike conversations with her, gentle, respectful attempts, but she always kept things brief, polite, distant. Her responses were like closed doors disguised as windows. She wasn't rude, she just wasn't available, not emotionally, not mentally, not in any way that mattered. And then, one afternoon, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic at first. No thunder, no cinematic moment where everything slowed down. Just a small, almost unnoticeable interruption in her routine. The bell above the bookstore door rang, and in walked a man holding the hand of a little girl. The child looked around with wide, curious eyes, her small fingers clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. The man, on the other hand, looked tired, but not in a defeated way. There was something steady about him, something quietly resilient. Alara noticed them, as she noticed everyone, but she didn't expect anything different. They would browse, maybe ask for a recommendation, and leave. That's how it always went. But the little girl wandered toward the children's section with a kind of wonder that felt almost sacred. She ran her fingers along the spines of books as if they were treasures waiting to be discovered. The man followed her at a slower pace, watching her with a softness that was impossible to ignore. Alara found herself observing them longer than usual. There was something about the way he knelt down to her level, listening to her as if her thoughts mattered more than anything else in the room. It wasn't grand or showy. It was simple, genuine care. Still, she kept her distance. Days turned into weeks, and they returned, again and again. Always together. Always the same quiet routine. The little girl would explore, and the man would patiently follow, occasionally glancing at Alara with a polite nod but never trying to force a conversation. That was what confused her the most. He didn't try. He didn't linger near the counter looking for an excuse to talk. He didn't compliment her or ask personal questions. He simply existed in the same space, respectful of boundaries she hadn't even had to enforce. It was as if he understood something about her without ever being told. And somehow, that unsettled her more than anything else. One afternoon, as rain tapped softly against the windows, the little girl approached the counter holding a book that was almost too big for her small hands. She looked up at Alara with hopeful eyes, and for a brief moment, Alara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a crack in her carefully built walls. She helped the child, her voice softer than usual, her movements gentler. The man watched from a distance, not intruding, just present. When the moment passed, he simply thanked her, quietly, sincerely, and left. That night, Alara couldn't explain why her thoughts kept returning to them. It wasn't romantic curiosity or sudden attraction. It was something deeper, something she didn't yet have the courage to name. It was the realization that not all connections demanded something from her. Some simply existed. Over time, small interactions began to form, not forced, not intentional, just natural. A brief exchange about a book. A shared smile when the little girl insisted on choosing the same story again. These moments were fragile, almost invisible, but they were real. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was an ordinary day, but life rarely announces its turning points. The bookstore was quieter than usual, the air filled with a calm stillness. The little girl was seated on the floor, flipping through a picture book, while the man stood near the counter. For the first time, he spoke to Alara, not with charm, not with rehearsed confidence, but with honesty so simple it disarmed her completely. He didn't ask her out. He didn't compliment her. He didn't try to impress her. He asked her something else entirely. He asked if she could recommend a book about healing, something for someone who had forgotten how to trust life again. The question wasn't directed at her as a woman. It wasn't layered with expectation. It was genuine, almost vulnerable. And in that moment, Alara realized something that shook her to her core. He wasn't trying to reach her. He was simply being human. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to retreat. Instead, she paused. She looked at him, not just at his face, but at the quiet strength in his presence, the way he carried his own unseen burdens with grace. She thought about the little girl, about the tenderness she had witnessed, about the absence of pressure or pretense. Something inside her shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. She walked over to a shelf and picked out a book she had never recommended before. It wasn't popular or widely known, but it held something rare, a kind of quiet hope that didn't ignore pain but moved through it. When she handed it to him, their fingers brushed briefly. It wasn't electric or overwhelming. It was simple, grounding, real. And for the first time, Alara didn't pull away. From that day on, things didn't suddenly become perfect. Healing never works like that. She still had moments of doubt, moments where her past tried to pull her back into old patterns. But something had changed. She had seen a different kind of connection, one that didn't demand, didn't rush, didn't break. The man and his daughter became a quiet part of her life. Not in a dramatic, sweeping way, but in the kind of slow, steady way that builds something real. Conversations grew longer. Silences became comfortable. And somewhere along the way, Alara realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to feel again. Not because someone forced her to, but because someone showed her that it was safe to try. The greatest change didn't come from grand gestures or declarations. It came from that single, simple question, the one that wasn't about winning her over, but about understanding pain. In the end, Alara didn't fall in love the way she once had, recklessly, without caution. This time, it was different. It was slower, deeper, rooted in trust that grew over time. And perhaps that was the most powerful kind of love of all. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that healing is possible and that the right people don't break you, they help you rebuild, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to The Kindness Chronicles. Your support helps stories like this reach those who need them most.